I'm good. Hey, sweetie. How are you? I'm good, dear. Hey, Reverend, how are you? Good to see you again. Okay. Reverend Tony, you're down there. Marcus, you right here. Good, how are you doing? Just flipping around. Thank you all so much for being here for our last official session of the day. I want to thank the chairman and the president of CNBC for allowing the CBC once again to participate. I want to thank my chairman, Emmanuel Cleaver, who I've always told people could tear it up, and he tore it up this morning. So I want to thank my chairman again. To the members of the CBC who are here, my colleagues, I see we've just been joined by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas. Let's give Sheila a hand. And we're going to begin this panel, even though Congresswoman Maxine Waters is not here yet. She should be here very shortly. So we're expecting her to join us. And of course, you met our doctor and our vice president of the CBC earlier, Congresswoman Donna Christensen from the Virgin Islands. So again, thank you all. It is my great pleasure to serve as moderator for today's final discussion. I'm Representative Marsha Fudge from Ohio, representing the 11th Congressional District. Thank you. And I'm honored to be here with you for many reasons. I serve as the CBC's For the People Voting Rights Initiative co-chair with my friend and colleague, Representative John Lewis. Now let's just take a walk down memory lane. The date was March 7th, 1965, and the place was Selma, Alabama. Young people led the way. Their goal was to achieve the uninhibited right to vote. Hundreds of brave men, women, and children marched, black and white, hand in hand. I can hear it now. Many of them were probably singing some of those old freedom songs like, "Oh, freedom, we shall not be moved," or "We shall overcome." And then, all at once, the marchers were attacked by police with billy clubs and tear gas. That day will forever be known as Bloody Sunday, a day when hundreds of Americans bled on Selma, Alabama's Pettus Bridge, bleeding for the struggle to secure our right to vote, our right to have equal, unrestricted, and unhampered access to the polls. The marchers were beat and knocked down, but they didn't stay down. They got up. 1 week later, they marched again, and a few days after that, they marched once more. Now, clergy and young people led the massive crowd. This time, thousands marched along the voting rights trail from Selma to Montgomery. Because of Bloody Sunday and the thousands of Americans who were beaten and killed over the years so that I can vote, so that we can all vote, I'm standing here today, and I refuse to let their efforts be in vain. The suppressive tactics being used today are not new. What we called a poll tax is now a new voter photo ID law. Instead of the physical threats, unnecessary and confusing laws are being used to restrict turnout and hamper the effect of early and absentee voting. It was the church and young people who led the way in '65, and we need the pulpit of the church and the energy of young people to lead the way today. This panel is going to talk to you about how we make that happen. This is, in fact, a call to action. So you're not going to hear any real speeches. We're going to open this up as I introduce the panel, and we're going to ask them some questions. And then when I finish my few questions, I'm going to let you ask them some questions. As I said, we're going to be joined by my colleague, Representative Maxine Waters. And until she gets here, I will just move on, and I will start out by introducing Reverend Tony Lee. Reverend Tony Lee is the founder and senior pastor of the Community of Hope African Methodist Episcopal Church. He formerly served as senior minister to young adults at Ebenezer AME Church in Fort Washington, Maryland. He oversaw the development of a wide range of youth ministries that engaged young people in a style of praise and worship that embraced their unique styles and interests. He received national media attention on BET's Cousin Jeff's Chronicles, on CNN and C-SPAN. Reverend Lee serves on the leadership team of Saving Ourselves, SOS, an organization working in the Gulf Coast on behalf of those victimized and impacted by the social, economic, and physical devastation of Hurricane Katrina. Next, we have Ajuwa Ansong. Did I get it right? Close? All right. Who is the president and CEO of Faith Links, Inc. She served as manager of federal affairs for the New England Council, the nation's oldest regional business organization, where she advocated for the interest of over 350 businesses across the 6-state New England region in Washington, D.C., where she worked. Her areas of responsibility were healthcare, and she also was the special assistant to our very own vice chair of the Democratic Caucus, John Larson of Connecticut. She earned a bachelor's degree in political science from Southern Connecticut State University and a master's degree in religious studies with a concentration in religion, ethics, and public policy from Howard University School of Divinity. She is also an instructor at the Calvary Bible Institute, where she teaches a course on faith and politics. Next, we have Cindy Smalls. Cindy Smalls is the National Voter Protection Manager for the AFL-CIO, working in the political department overseeing the 2012 My Vote, My Right voter protection campaign. Prior to coming to the AFL-CIO, Cindy worked for SEIU from 2007 to 2012 in various capacities as the Mid-Atlantic Area Political Director, Senior Legislative Advocate, and Coordinating Manager overseeing SEIU's retiree program. She served as a field director for the South Carolina Democratic Party and has provided technical assistance to candidates for city council, mayor, and school board, and has a BA in political science from the University of South Carolina. Marcus Mason is a partner at the Madison Group. He is responsible for managing the firm's transportation, energy, tax, and homeland security portfolio. In addition, he focuses on crisis management, complex integrated campaigns, and coalition building. He has more than 15 years of political and policy experience. Prior to joining TMG, he served as Amtrak's Senior Director of Government Affairs. Marcus is a member of the Board of Directors of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. He is also on the Board of Directors of the Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee. Marcus is also a published author who writes spy thrillers, which I just found out. Next, we have my homeboy, Jeff Johnson. Jeff is an award-winning journalist, social activist, and political commentator and author. From his celebrated conversations with marquee world figures in the political, business, and entertainment arenas, to his grassroots trench work to inspire the next generation of leaders, investigative journalist, political correspondent, and activist, Jeff Johnson continues to be a trailblazing social entrepreneur and authentic voice for change. Currently, Jeff is an MSNBC contributor and executive editor of Politic 365. He is a weekly commentator on the nationally syndicated Tom Joyner Morning Show and chairman and CEO of the Jeff Johnson Institute for Urban Development, currently leading a 5-year project to recruit and develop 80,000 black male teachers. And he has earned a reputation as a voice of conscience. We are pleased to have all of our panelists. Please give them all a round of applause. My first question is, as Martin Luther King Jr. talked about the war in Vietnam, he asked the question, and I asked this question because I believe we are at war today. He said, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. Oftentimes, members of the faith community hold politics and politicians at arm's length and choose not to engage in the process. How do we remind the especially younger generation of faith leaders about the Black church's historical connection to politics and social change and motivate them to act? The floor is open. Anyone that would like to ask? Come on, Reverend.
I'll start. I think that many in this room are very clear on the fact that there has been a considerable shift as it relates to national faith leadership and their ability to be apolitical versus political. And that shift has happened, one, because of, in many cases, what you all have been discussing for the last hour, which is the IRS attack on those that would attempt to be political and focused, losing status. But I think that one of the challenges in young leadership being able to model not just what Dr. King was about, but the legacy that I think comes from the Black church in particular, and that's using the prophetic voice to be able to speak to issues beyond that of church to that of life, is because in many cases they don't always see it. And I think that there's a great deal of discussion about the legacy of the church as it relates to sociopolitical issues and the ability to be able to mobilize around them, but not a lot of modeling. And so until that modeling happens, it doesn't exist. And we can have a lot of rhetorical discussion about it. And I'll close with this. I think when we start, the whole notion of this discussion here is call to action. And when you say call and action, that implies that there is an ask and a response. But in the middle of that, there has to be training. And I think one of the things that we have removed from the African American institutional tradition is an emphasis on training. And by that I mean not the theological training that comes from seminary from the standpoint of being able to be a pastor within a denomination, but the training of what it means to be a grassroots organizer, utilizing the prophetic voice to be able to mobilize folks with a level of proficiency, not just passion. And one of the things that frustrates me is that we put an overemphasis on passion and an underemphasis on direction and focus. And so I think that there's a tremendous opportunity, and many of your churches are doing this, but I think that there are too many that are not. And I think there needs to be an institutionalized process that puts us in a position where we're seeing not just young faith leaders, but congregants trained proficiently on how to do social justice activism, so that when they're coming out of our houses of faith, it's not just with passion and not just with vision, but with proficiency, focus, a strategy that's connected to it, measurable goals that are associated with it, data that's collected as a result of it. And at the end of the day, we're able to say, here is what was accomplished as a result of our congregants going out into the local community and addressing these issues to the goal of creating this result. Not just speaking, exciting people to a state of euphoric inactivity where they jump up and down and they do the same thing they did before we started talking, and there's no transformative change.
Thank you.
The church say amen.
Amen.
And I think that another piece to connect to that, and I think one of the things that Jeff said that was so significant was about really connecting it to something that makes sense for people in their everyday lives. There's a disconnect for many, especially from our generations, between the impact of policy and what it means in the hood, or what it means on our block. And so we're talking about policy issues, we're talking about legislative issues, but they're not seeing how policy impacts where they live. And there's a need, if we're going to be able to do it and shape it, is to show the connection between policy and where people live in their everyday life. Not just that, but even a historical reflection on what we have right now is a lot of it, and I love the boomer generation, I love the generation above it, but what we have is a lot of historical reflection and back padding and that kind of a piece. But this generation needs to see and really grab a hold of what those policy changes did to impact their current lifestyle. And there needs to be a way to shape that in a way. Let me give you a good example from a biblical, since we got preachers in here, that we tell them about what it was like for a generation to cross the Red Sea, but they're in the wilderness wearing hand-me-downs. And so they're hearing the victories of the past while in the wilderness wearing hand-me-downs, trying to figure out what the heck they're going to do when they face the walls of Jericho. And so there's a need to be able to show that the same God, the same tactics that we use at the Red Sea will be helpful to, one, get them out of the wilderness, but two, to be able to tear down the walls of Jericho and help them to get in the promised land living. But if you don't make the connection, then all they see is wilderness, and all they see is hand-me-downs, and all they see is we're making enough just to make it today, but they don't see how to move forward to make it tomorrow, and all they hear is there are giants in that land.
All right. All right. Listen, I'm going to just take one just brief pause. I indicated to you that we would be joined by my colleague and friend, Representative Maxine Waters from California, who has now joined us, and all of you know Congresswoman Maxine Waters. I also want to recognize Terry Sewell, the representative out of Alabama. Terry has joined us as well. And to draw your attention to the Congressional Black Caucus Voter Empowerment Program, which all of you, I don't know if you have it, if you don't, please make sure you take this when you leave. This is all a part of our call to action this afternoon. The next question, just see if you can help me understand and articulate for the audience the message that we are hearing. What is the message we are hearing today with this resurgence of voter suppression, and what message is being communicated to our communities, and how can we counteract the message being sent by the passage of these laws? Anybody? Yes, it's open. It's open to any person on the panel.
Give me some breathing room.
Go ahead, Congresswoman.
Well, I just asked if she would give me a little breathing room. I just came in, but let me take this opportunity to thank all of our clergy, our ministers, our pastors who are here in Washington, D.C. at this conference, and the fact that you're taking time out from your schedule to talk about how you can use your power and your influence to impact the politics of this nation on behalf of not only the President of the United States, but for all people who should be involved in voting and this democracy. Without participation, there will be no democracy. So I'm very pleased that you see this as a part of your responsibility and something that you can have great influence with. Now, having said that, I want to point to something, a conversation that I just had with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jesse Jackson has played an interesting role in the politics of this country for many years, particularly registering young people to vote and registering large numbers of people to vote for years now. And he has an interesting way of connecting with young people. I find myself sometimes feeling as if I'm talking at young people rather than connecting with them. But in this conversation that I had with him recently, I better understood why he connects. When he talked to young people, he talked about Trayvon Martin, and he wanted to know what they cared about, what they understood, what they knew. They were all fired up. Trayvon had been killed. They knew all of the circumstances of the killing, and they were mad and they wanted to do something. And then Reverend asked how many people were registered to vote. And so I guess less than half of them were actually registered to vote. And then Reverend Jackson said, well, if you were asked to serve on the jury to make a decision about whether or not Trayvon Martin had been murdered, had been killed, and deserved to be punished, if you're not registered to vote, you couldn't serve on the jury. And they said, what? No. And then he laid it out and he explained it to them, that in order to serve on a jury, you have to be registered to vote. They didn't know that. But that connected in a way that most of us don't often understand how to make that connection. We preach about the way it used to be. We preach about what they ought to know and what they ought to understand and how it was, and as my kids say, in the olden days, civil rights movement. And they look at us, but they're not always connecting. But when you can take something that's going on in their lives and connect it in a very graphic way, then they began to get it. And so I think as we talk on this panel about what you just asked us to do, and how do you connect? How do you get the message across? We do have to understand that we have to pay attention to what it is that young people are listening to or what they care about. And we've got to get, and I'm sure someone may have talked already or will be talking about social media and how it works. And I bet many of you have not thought about what a role you can play with the social media, and we can take a lesson from President Obama and what he did with the social media, how he raised money, how he organized, and you would be surprised. With many of our young people, they don't read the newspapers. They flip past what's going on the news, but they're on the internet. They get their information from the blogging and the tweeting. And guess what? One minister out about his business, tweeting to thousands with the message could do more than, I dare not say on Sunday morning in the pulpit because you won't like it if I say that. However, you could connect and talk to people on your own time, all during the day, in the evening, and guess what? As you build that following, it becomes broader than the church population because, it multiplies. And so I hope that we can get into a little bit of that today, because I think that perhaps the power and influence of the church still is not being utilized. It is underutilized, perhaps not understood. And I see Jefferson back there just shaking his head because I think he understands something about telecommunications and all of that. With that, I'll turn it back over to Ms.
Thank you so very, very much. And we are going to get into that subject. Ms. Smalls.
So what I wanted to just address on the question that you asked around what is the message with all these voter suppression bills that we're seeing passed in these various states, what's the message? And coming from a labor perspective, this is an attack on working people in this country. We, as labor, went through in 2011, starting in 2010, the attack on working people around collective bargaining. And we view this as one more fight that we are trying to combat. And we are in a war. And the message is, it is an attack on working people. How do we combat that? It's with the people in this room that we have to be the voices. We are the ones who have organized. We are the ones who have protested in the streets, and we have to get back to that. And we have to create a message that resonates not only to the older folks, but this young generation. We have to connect in a way that they understand. We have to tell the story about how we came over, but we have not yet come over because we still have a lot to do. There's a lot of work to be done. And so all the rights that we've enjoyed as citizens in this country around collective bargaining, around the basic right to vote, it is under attack. And that is the message. We are under attack. And so the message is we must rise up as one, like we did in Wisconsin and Ohio in those fights. And we have to come together and tell the story that we will not lay down, that we will be in the streets, we will be on the internet, we will tweet, we will be on MSNBC and CNN to tell the story. But it starts here by us raising our voices.
Thank you, Mr. Mason.
I'm just going to follow up on what my dear friend Cindy said, but first I want to clarify the record. As the Congresswoman was reading my bio, I noticed that the wrong bio was being read. I'm a man of many political hats, as some of my friends have said, but I would not be here were it not for a black minister who was the son of another black minister who were both elected officials. Walter Tucker III empowered me as a 21-year-old to run his campaign for Congress. And just a few months after he empowered me, we won that campaign for Congress. So I've been in politics now for about 20, oh Lord, I don't want to say it. But I've been in politics now half my life. I started off running congressional campaigns, and I've never lost a campaign that I've actually managed. But interestingly enough, at 21, a black minister empowered me, and the black church was key to that election victory. It was critical to that election victory. And when that African American minister empowered me, I went to the ministers in the congressional district and asked them to empower one young person in the church that could be a liaison, that I could use to help organize and turn out a number of key votes. But I want to get back to the question, what message is being sent? What message is being sent to our young people by these new voter ID laws? Because that wasn't something that I had to deal with during that particular election. I have a 19-year-old daughter who is a rising junior at Howard University. And as fathers of daughters know, sometimes they will come to you and say very prophetic things. After watching the news coverage of the assault on women's rights and female reproductive rights and the assault on voter ID and the assault on voters' rights, my daughter came into me and she said something that I did not expect her to say. She said, "Dad, it seems to me like we won the battle, but someone wants to make sure that we lose the war." And that is the message that's being sent to our young people with these new voter ID laws. We won the battle with the passage of all the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Acts. We win the battle every year, every time we get the Voting Rights Act funded and reauthorized. However, someone sat back after 2008 where there were 5 million new voters registered, 4 million of which were African American. Someone said, it's time for them to lose the war, and let's put in place a strategy and execute the tactics that will cause them to lose the war. And let's catch them flat-footed while they're cheering and celebrating. Let's catch them flat-footed and let's implement this right now. So we have to fight back. And I was always taught that not only do you choose your battles, but you also choose the fields on which you can fight. And you choose those fields on which you can win. Now, I am here as the treasurer of the Protecting Our Vote Super PAC, which was a super PAC that we stood up in 2 months. We did in 2 months what the other side had 2 years to do. We stood it up in 2 months, and now we're ready to roll. We are choosing our battle, and we are choosing the field on which we fight. Now, you can't match them dollar for dollar. You can't match them in an air campaign, but you can match them in a ground campaign. Our strength and the strength of the black church has been on the ground. They have been able to put boots on the ground and win by going door to door, block to block, precinct to precinct, until you ultimately have a district or a county swinging in one direction. That's something that we have to remember. And even though these laws have been enacted in several states, we have to get back off of our heels, get back on the balls of our feet, lean forward into this fight and engage. Because if we don't, the gains of 2006 and 2008 will have been for naught. And that means that the gains of everyone who fought before us, long before I was alive, will have been for naught. We may have won the battle, but the message that is being sent is you will, not you might, but you will lose the war. And that is a very powerful psychological message to our young people. We have to reverse that.
Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah.
In response to your question on how do we counteract the message that we're getting that Marcus so eloquently summed up, I think what we have to do is focus on the education piece. And I came across an interesting stat earlier today that said 61% of all African Americans say that houses of worship should express their views on social and political issues. Now, that is compelling to me because I'm not sure how many faith leaders understand that that's the case. So what we need to be doing is, in addition to talking to our congregations about what the issues are, we need to engage the outside on where we stand on certain issues. So we need to be in the social media outlets. We need to be out on the forefront saying, this is our stance on this issue. We don't agree with it, or we do agree with it, depending on what the issue is, and we need to make sure that we're heard. We can't shy away from that. So I think in order to counteract what we're hearing from the opposite end, we need to be as forceful as they are in expressing where we are on the issue.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think probably all of us know how low down these people are that we deal with out here. When we voted 4 years ago, it was historic, and everybody wanted to be a part of history. What we have to make people understand today is that now it is personal. We have a personal stake in what goes on. So my question really kind of becomes, how do we get past the point of just complaining about what someone has done to us? We know that in every single congressional district throughout this country, the black vote can make or break an election. We know that, and everybody else knows it. That's why, of course, all of these laws have been passed. But also, I wonder at some point, are we really still relevant? Because you look at 2010 and you see what we did, and I have people now telling me, well, it's not really going to make any difference. My life didn't change. What I don't understand, and maybe you can help me figure out how we get to people who probably need more than anybody else. The people who need to vote the most are the people who vote the least. How do we encourage them to take ownership in the political process without having to literally go to their house, put them in a car, take them to the polls, tell them how to vote? How do we get them to understand that it is in their interest, in their best interest, to vote?
I think Reverend Lee talked about it a little bit earlier, and I think Congresswoman Waters mentioned it. It's about being relevant with our messaging and making sure we're connecting what are you angry with to somebody in office or somebody having the responsibility to deal with it. But I think one of the things that is really not necessarily a 2012 proposition, but a post-2012 proposition, is we keep playing checkers and everybody else is playing chess. And we want to talk about folks being engaged in the process when we haven't been engaged in the process. And so being engaged and exciting people about the electoral process is by making sure people are engaged when there's not an election taking place. And the ways to do that is through institutional infrastructure. And so I think we talk good game about counterbalancing the folks that we're going against, but they invest in their institutions. And what I mean by that is all of us have seen a fight in the community, right? You've seen something go down in the community. And sometimes you can get Big Brother to help you out. But sometimes you got to go home to get Daddy. Because sometimes only Daddy's going to fix it. And we keep trying to have Big Brother organizations do what Daddy institutions are supposed to do. And by that I mean, if we're going to be serious about playing politics, then we have to be able to create the kind of institutional infrastructure that has the ability to counteract what their institutions do. And so you can't have local churches counterbalancing what multi-million-dollar national institutions do. That's not our job. That's not the local church's job. The local church has a job to do, and it has the ability to be able to excite and galvanize and organize and even train. But at some point, we need focused institutions whose job it is to do policy work, to do training work, to do organizing work. And whether that's investing in focused work with the NAACP and Urban League and existing institutions, or whether that's about developing new institutions, until we get to the point where we're utilizing resources to be able to develop the kind of institutions that can counterbalance the Heritage Foundation and counterbalance the religious right and show that there is a black religious organized political force where you don't have to risk your 501c3 because you developed a 501c4 that's got sensibilities from a faith perspective to be able to battle those institutions that you're fighting against. Until we do that, we continue to try to get to the end and say, king me, I'm the chief Negro that's speaking more than anybody else. And they like, checkmate, Negro, you ain't playing the wrong game. And so let's get to the point where we begin to have, and again, this is not a 2012 conversation. I think the 2012 conversation is about how do we begin to develop the local agendas that says, how do we educate folks around voter ID? How do we educate people around their rights and about voter disenfranchisement? How do we begin to make sure that people know all the information that's on the ballot, not just who's running for president? How do we make sure that all those folks are registered to vote? And then how do we make sure we utilize our infrastructure to get those people to the polls? That's a 2012 conversation. But a 2014, 2016 conversation is about how can the churches in my state begin to organize to help develop institution with people that are already in the state attempting to develop them, to begin to say, if I'm in the state of California, how do I begin to make sure that my Congress people are protected, that we're raising money for congressional races, that we're dealing with ballot initiatives in the state of California to be beating our behinds on ballot initiatives, that we're training young people, not around the issues that we want them to address, but if we want young people to be engaged, empower them to address their own stuff, and at the end of the day, it helps you anyway, even though you don't agree with how they do it. How do you begin to develop institution that says we're serious about playing the political game, not just being involved in political rhetoric?
Thank you very much. Congresswoman Waters.
This conversation that we're having is a conversation we've been having for a long time. We've been having this conversation for a long time as we have watched our communities get excited in 2008 because we had an African American on the ballot that could be president of the United States and did become president of the United States. 2010, in the midterm elections, they thought their job was done. They didn't go to the polls, and we lost the Congress of the United States. And as I campaign now, there is an enthusiasm gap out there. Why is there an enthusiasm gap? We can sit here and talk all that we want about what they should do and why it is important to talk about the labor issues. But people who don't have no job don't care about the labor issues. You know what I'm saying? And so I want to just take this in a respectful place. And that is this. This joblessness, these home foreclosures, what's happening in our communities got people turned off. They are not jumping up and down about voting this time. And as I go through the communities, all I can think about, even though this does not sound that sophisticated, is the politics that talked about a chicken in every pot. People are hungry. They don't have jobs. They thought they had invested in the American dream by signing on the dotted line for a mortgage they got tricked on. And their homes are being taken. And in our communities, the push carts and the homelessness is just growing all over the place. And so, what do you mean when you talk about institutions doing the work of educating, etc.? I can tell you, we all have a role to play. We all have a role to play. Many of our civil rights organizations are depending on the same people for their money to run those organizations that's causing us trouble in the first place. Now, this is serious business. They can't get the money from our community. And so, I was shocked when I learned that the very super PAC that was responsible for supporting the work of getting these legislatures online to require more identification, et cetera, were some of the same ones that we vote for every day in the Congress. These are the ones that are considered, you know, AT&T and all of your big organizations who are supporting and giving millions of dollars to a super PAC that's undermining your rights. So we have a responsibility to know this stuff and to be able to leverage and to talk with them about it when they come and ask us for something. The other thing is this. We all belong, not everybody, we all belong to the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party raises millions of dollars and it decides how it's going to spend them. We're the base vote of the Democratic Party. We're the ones that can be counted on. We're the ones that if we vote, they don't have to ask us how we vote. We vote in Democratic. But when you develop your strategy or your plan for how you want to get to your community, I don't know if the Democratic Party is there with the resources that they're extracting from this overall community. Now, having said that, somebody talked about Wisconsin's and labor. Well, let me back up to talk about the legislatures who have passed these laws that would interfere with our rights, whether they're ID laws or early, voter, they cut down on the early voter days, all of that. Where was the Democratic Party when all of this was going on? This is what parties are organized for. How is it you can have 25 or 26 legislatures who have gone through the past 2 years doing this, and the Democratic Party didn't know anything about it? I mean, we're pulling up the rear. And now we've got to figure out how we're going to get Ms. Jones, who's 80 years old, to the polls, because she doesn't have any ID. I mean, so we're doing this work. So now, institutionally, church, you are so generous to us. You let us come and you speak in your churches. And we get up and we say all the good things. Don't nobody ask us any questions. We don't have to answer anybody. We just tell people all this good stuff we've been doing. All right? And we get away with it. Stop letting us do that. Stop letting us do that. As a matter of fact, I want you to have your social justice committee or whatever you have in the church. I want you to know my voting record when I get there. And I want you to go down that list and you say, well, now you voted, this way on this, that. You voted for payday loans. They take 400% interest from our people in our community. Why'd you vote for them? And then they're going to start stuttering. Okay, because they don't know that you took money from them. You took the big contributions, but you undermine. So young people know when you're truthful and when you stand for something, whether you love them or not. They really know this. And so when we come and you allow us to have that platform talking stuff, and they sitting in the church, they ain't paying no attention to what we're saying. And so the church has a responsibility to understand why you're letting somebody speak. And I want to tell you, the Democratic Party says to us, take me to your church. And here we come.
In October. Yeah, 2 weeks before the election.
Yeah, 2 weeks before the election. Here we come, Pastor. This is my so-and-so from so-and-so. This guy don't care nothing about the church and nothing else. So we are bringing them to you, and because you love us and you're generous, you give us the platform, and then you allow us to transfer the platform to other people. Stop doing it.
All right.
Stop doing it. And so let's all take responsibility. And for our civil rights organizations who say they have to take the money from certain folks, we're just going to have to say, look, you can't, there's certain places you can't go. There are just certain places you can't go. Because if you go there, you just sold us out. Okay? Now, this conversation that we're talking about, let it start to be something real.
That's right.
Where you all tell us, and we tell you, and we tell them, and everybody else, and we do all the organizing together with labor. But labor, we want your resources too. We want the resources of labor for voter registration. We want the resources of labor to help create some jobs for these young people. And I want to tell you, ministers, you got all these young people in your church, and we spend millions of dollars on everything. But you don't make us go to the printer, the black printer, or the minority printer in our districts to help generate economic development. And all these kids, we say volunteer and walk precincts. I'm past the volunteer thing. Let's pay these kids. Let's pay them to work in these campaigns so that, number one, they can earn some money. But number two, they can learn, and we can learn to respect them. They can learn to respect the system. So let's start thinking outside the box about how we do our politics. And let's love each other and let's respect each other, but let's call a spade, okay? Enough said.
All right. I'm going to go. Let me just do this. I'm going to go to Reverend Tony, let him respond to this question. Then I'm going to take 4 or 5 questions from the audience, and then I'm going to ask each panelist to take 2 minutes to wrap up, to give you a charge, what they think your call to action should be.
I think one of the joys of Congresswoman Waters is that she's always straight up with us, and so she's talked real straight up just with a range of folks. If you will allow me, since we're here as faith leaders, as a pastor, I think the church also needs to be straight up. It needs to be straight up about where we are and even analyzing our level of strength in this moment. Sometimes when you act like you're stronger than you are, then you don't do what you need to do to get stronger.
Amen.
And one of the challenges I don't think many folks want to deal with is that we're looking at a time period in which most of the major houses that have historically have been utilizing these kinds of efforts aren't as strong as they used to be. Y'all will act like I'm not telling the truth, but we're dealing with shrinkage of black churches all over the nation. Y'all act like it's a recession, but a recession don't shrink a church. A recession grows a church because people need the Lord more. But what we're dealing with, I would humbly posit, is that we're dealing with a generational transition, that we're dealing with the fact that most of the major houses that we have depended on so long have been built by and for baby boomers. They were built by and for baby boomers, and now baby boomers are graying. And as baby boomers are graying, still the churches and the systems are still built to meet the needs of boomers, communicate to boomers, and the apparatuses are shaped to mobilize boomers, but they are not shaped to communicate to deal with, or to mobilize generations X, Y, or Z. And that's why most of the research shows that the millennial generation, or Generation Y, that 20-year-old age range, is one of the most unchurched generations we've ever seen. But it does not say they're the least prayerful generation. They love God, but they fail to see the relevance in church because our churches were shaped for a different generation. I'm saying that because there's no way that you can really deal with and grab a hold of social media if it's run by boomers. There's no way that you can talk about mobilizing, speaking to, and energizing a base of young people that we keep saying if young people aren't even coming to your church. And so there's a need for us to honestly deal with where we are now, and as we're talking about this long-term game plan, not just right now, but even down the road, there's a need for us also to be identifying young, up-and-coming pastors, brothers and sisters, maybe even youth ministers, who know how to touch this generation and the generations that follow and help empower them and get them connected. Stop staying at the table just for yourself. You're getting old. Put somebody else at the daggone table. Stop going to all the meetings for yourself. One of the blessings for myself was that Dr. Granger Brown and Dr. Joanne Browning would send me to the meetings. And one of the greatest blessings, I was a youth minister, and Dr. Granger Brown on New Year's Eve was like, "What you doing, Tony? Come on, let's go over to Jesse Jackson's house, sit at his dinner table, and talk about what we're going to be talking about for black people for next year." That's how I grew. But I grew 10, 15 years ago being put at those tables. You can't wait until, y'all gonna sit there and wait till we 45 years old and act like we just coming to the kids' table. No, I'm a grown man now. Let's reach back for some of them 20-something-year-olds who are coming up that can communicate to these youngins and help mobilize and energize them, and that's how we've got to do it.
Amen. I'm gonna take 5 questions, 5 hands real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna take 6 as my colleague stood up. 6.
Yes.
1 question each now, mind y'all.
Is talking like a mother, and I'm listening to Jeff Johnson talk like a son. And it makes sense because of the makeup of the panel. But are we on the brink, because we have people who don't care, and we've got this apathetic attitude, the recidivism, the low economic indicator, are we at a point of anarchy in this country? Do you see it happening if we don't get a handle on it, if we can't get people excited? Do you see us at a place where this country really could erupt?
Thank you. Anyone want to tackle that? No, I will say this. I don't think so, primarily because if it takes as much to get our people out to do something like voting for the president or doing some other things, I don't see the kind of uprising that you are imagining may happen. I don't know that there is any kind of leadership strong enough in our communities today to galvanize people across this country to do that. I think things would have to get significantly worse, and they're bad now. So I don't know. I mean, who knows what tomorrow holds, but certainly I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Let me just add to that, and I would agree with the Congresswoman, but I would say this. We have too much for that to happen. We have too much. If you sit back and you think about the Arab Spring and think about the people who use social media to change the very head of government in their country, they had nothing, which meant they had nothing to lose. When you got a little something, you think about it. You start to think about it. You start to march out there, you got your spear in your hand, and the next thing you know, you go, I got a Sony PlayStation. I got a color television. It's 52 inches. I've got a Lincoln Navigator.
And I live at home for free.
And I live at home for free. So when you have too much, it is almost impossible to be incited to riot, to be incited to that fervor.
Thank you. I called on 5 people. Stand up. Okay.
I was the next one.
How you doing?
Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah.
Let me say this prayer.
Very quickly. One question each, remember.
I'm about the oldest one in this room who's been involved in the movement. Amos Brown.
Amos Brown.
Jackson, Mississippi got involved when I was 15 years old. Let me say quickly to the young people. Don't glorify the civil rights movement. Only 3% of the black churches, according to a study that was done, were involved. It was just a handful of Ralph Abernathy's, C.K. Steele, Shuttlesworth, Sam Whitney's. So let us stop glorifying the civil rights movement, because many of those churches told us, don't come in here with that civil rights message. We're dealing with the gospel. That's reality check number 1. Number 2, in 1901, Dr. Elias Camp Morris, president of Arkansas Baptist College, delivered the commencement address, and he said, there's too much crime in our community. And you young men must not make the street corner your resting place. 1901. 1820, when J. Mercer Langston left Virginia and went up to your state, Madam Chair, you know what was said? A black brother said, we came from Virginia to Ohio thinking this would be the promised land, but the only door that was open to us was the prison door and the penitentiary door. Mm-hmm. As long as we got this white privileged mentality in this country, and we got this issue of race, the struggle is on. So I say, don't become discouraged. Just use what you got and energize the crowd that you got and work like hell, because as long as you got people around who don't look like us, they're going to forever be trying to be in control of us. And that's the reason why we cannot deal with this issue right now of same-sex marriage, because many of us have been conned and used by white Eurocentric theology, and we have not thought for ourselves. I don't perform no same-sex marriage. That's not a part of my Baptist tradition. But it's time for black folks to think for themselves and stop letting those other folks think for us, and stand up and hang in there and use what you got and stop looking at what you don't have on hand.
Thank you, sir. With the other 3 people I called on, please stand up, and we're going to do this quickly.
Hello, I'm Pastor Gwynn. I'm president of the Ministerial Alliance of Baltimore, Maryland. And my question is, have we caved into political correctness? I've noticed how we have been compromising with all kinds of issues. Nobody wants to stand up and say what needs to be done out of the box. You know, we won by boycott, marches, sit-in, civil disobedience to unjust laws, and finally we put people to the ballot box. That's how we won a lot of things we have now. But is political correctness the order of the day that's hindering us from doing what we need to do?
Someone is saying yes, but let me just say this before they answer the question, and I'm certainly going to let the panel do it. But I would say to you that the Congressional Black Caucus does not yield to political correctness. Our problem is when we look around, ain't nobody standing behind us. That's our problem. Anytime we say something somebody doesn't like, then y'all want to be upset with us. What we're trying to do is tell the truth. We represent most of the black people in this country. But how many of you all stick with us? Now, that's the truth is what it is. Now, this summer, we're going to be taking a tour around this country talking about how we get people registered to vote. We're going to be taking buses. I want to see how many of y'all on the bus. I'm going to look for you. If you're not on the bus, I'm going to call you. And I'm going to call you out. Anybody want to answer that question?
Just really quickly, I think that the short answer is yes. The medium answer is that we need to employ a little bit of political sophistication, because it doesn't mean that we have to be such antagonists all the time that we just mad. Right. There are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, and I think what the Congresswoman talked about is where we seem to fall short, which is from the church's perspective, what is our political agenda, so we know how to engage everybody all the time, which means that you won't always be my friend, because there are going to be some issues that I got to roll on you on. And I can't be afraid of doing that because I want to come to your house for the private dinners that you have. And I think that what was mentioned earlier was that many of us have gotten too comfortable based on the things that we have. And so I think leadership by and large, and I don't think that's just faith leadership. I think that's my colleagues in the media. I think that those that are elected officials. I think that they're all of us that in many cases have got to be a little bit more politically sophisticated and say, what is this comprehensive agenda? And not even some institutional agenda. What's my personal political agenda? So that I know how to not be politically correct when it's expedient. And when it's necessary, but also know how to be politically sophisticated enough to know this is not a battle I need to fight right now because I need to win this one later. That's not punking out, that's being strategic. But when all you do is punk out, that's politically correctness. And we got to fight that and challenge that a little bit. But if we don't have a political agenda, then what do we have to drive us? And so I think that's a necessary piece to be able to come out of that political correctness, is to have the agenda, be sophisticated around that agenda, be prepared to fight when necessary so that you can negotiate those periods of peace.
And I think something also Jeff said about agenda is that we also, especially at the Black church, have to deal with kowtowing to the liberal orthodoxy. That there is kind of a progressive, what it means to be progressive or liberal. And if you don't meet this litmus test, then you're no longer in the club anymore. We have to deal with the fact that we cannot, that our agenda is not dictated by any party or any kind of faction, but it's dictated by God. And so therefore we have to be prophetic more than we are progressive. And as we move into prophetic, then that's when we find our base of power. As long as we're connecting to some kind of liberal or progressive orthodoxy, then we lose our power because we lose our moral voice. And that's where our power as the church is. It's not about who we're connected to here, but it's about who we're connected to there. And that's where we gain our power and we gain our strength.
Okay, I'm going to ask both of these gentlemen, both of you ask your question before we have any responses. Then I'm going to ask, as we try to respond to you, ask Mr. Rangel to come up and close, and then ask our chairman to do the benediction. So if both of you would, you ask your question, and then you just ask yours immediately, and we'll try to answer them both.
Quickly, Congresswoman Wallace shared with us about keeping the Democratic Party accountable. How do you suggest that we hold them accountable to invest real money in the community to address some of these issues around the voting oppression?
We're going to answer. We're going to take his question too, so we can answer them both.
Both Jeff Johnson and Pastor Tony Lee made mention of the fact that we have an election to win here in 2012, but we have work to do beyond 2012. And I'd like to know from the Congressional Black Caucus perspective, in particularly in my region, I'm dealing with a right-wing evangelical movement that has bamboozled the black brethren. What's the method? What's the move to attempt to rally those that Congresswoman Waters have referred to, who are not really concerned because there's no food on the table, there's no jobs? How do we make the connection? What's the agenda to make the connection between the political process and not being bamboozled, if that makes sense?
Thank you. We're going to go to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and let me just thank the panel, thank Congresswoman Fudge, thank our co-chairs, Congressman Rangel and Congressman Cedric Richmond, and our chairperson. Let me just hold up and make 2 quick points and then spiritually go to my seat. If there are any poster children for shame, and this is a map of shame, I know that Pastor Freddie Haynes would join me and say that Texas is certainly fighting for the prize, and Florida is right in the mix. The map of shame, and somebody wanted to call out another state, of course, is a voter ID, which is what a lot of the discussion was. If you will note, more than 75% of America is trying to do voter ID. I call this the 21st century poll tax. And when you talk to your congregation, even though that sounds like we're talking baby boomer, young people understand that as well. So I want to just say these points. The point is that you just had an IRS meeting. Having policy discussions about getting rid of this is not lobbying. Having it outside of the realm of the church house, having it somewhere where you're leading it is okay. And if there ever is a 21st century civil rights movement, it is the voter ID. For it does nothing other than say you're trying to show up as this pastor right here. It has nothing to do with fraud. So I would say this. We do have a place for Twitter and email, but we have a place for prayer vigils, marches, standing on a street corner. When I say stand on a street corner, standing in the chamber of a city hall, because children organized 35,000 people in Sanford, Florida. Children organized that, and it made a difference. I would just encourage you to work with us, because if you work with the Congressional Black Caucus, we can do great things together. Call on us as we call on you. Let's get rid of this map of shame, and let us not be fearful of coming together on things that you are comfortable with, prayer vigils, marches, and others. I bet you we can turn this country partly around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now wrap this session up. I'm going to ask each one of my panelists to say, just give us a minute. Hopefully somebody will answer the questions that were asked. I'm then going to turn it over to our chairman, Reverend Cleaver. If we would start down at the end, Cindy.
So just to wrap up, I would just encourage, if we think about take-backs, and as we leave here and we go into our states, in our congregation, that we think about the 2012 election and to start to think strategically about what we can do individually around educating people in our congregation, our folks, around the changes of these laws. I think that's the most important thing that we need to do. In our everyday walks and all that we do, we need to start now, not 2 months from now. We need to start now educating people in our community about the changes of the laws, the process of the laws, and getting them ready to vote in November. The other thing I would encourage, we talked a lot about, and we didn't talk about it here, but people should know that there are groups out there like True to Vote that are now encouraging and recruiting 1 million challengers this November to challenge our folks in being communities of color, to challenge people at the polls. And I think what we need to do and put an emphasis on is encouraging our folks in our congregations to also be poll workers, to be poll monitors, to be active out on Election Day. So if I would leave you with 2 things, I would say that we go back and we educate our folks in the community about these changes in the laws and how they need to get ready. And the other thing is to engage and activate folks to be active in any way that they can on Election Day.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson.
I won't be redundant in what I've already said, but how many of you all know a place in your community that makes the best fried chicken you've ever had? Right, that's not a rhetorical question, I'm serious. How many of you all know a place in your community that makes the best fried chicken you ever had? You know that that's not the best-selling business in that community. What is the difference between them and KFC? KFC markets better. And the challenge that I'm seeing is that the religious right has marketed Christendom better than you. And if you want to deal with how do you stop the Christian right from being able to bamboozle the folks that are around you, it's by being aggressive with your message and what you believe and what you want. They're not afraid to say what they believe. They're not afraid to say what they want, and they're not afraid to tell you you're wrong. You preach Bible, but they say they are the Bible. And so if we're going to be serious about not allowing the religious right to define the narrative about what it means to be Christian, then you've got to be more aggressive about outside of your churches, talking about what that looks like and the policy that accompanies it, not the other way around. The church should not chase the policy. The church, through its moral compass, should push to be able to set the policy that's a reflection of what it is that you preach. But if you're a punk outside of the four walls of the church, then it doesn't work. And we find ourselves being rhetorically gangster in the pulpit and punks in the street. And so if we want to be able to control the message, then control the message. And don't let your people be controlled by a religious right simply because they're more aggressive. Hijack the message from them the way they hijacked it from us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Congresswoman Waters.
I think Jeff Johnson talked about what we do now and what we do as we plan for the future. Right now, we've got the problem of exciting people, getting them to the polls, and we only got, another 5-6 months before November. The primaries are going on all over the country. And so, know your state laws. And I want to tell you, you're ministers and you're focused on the gospel, but you've got a lot of young people and professionals and others in the church. Give them an assignment. Give the lawyers an assignment in the church. Give the young MBAs an assignment. Have them come back with the information, some of which you have been introduced here today, this week, and know what your state laws are, what you can and you can't do. And so, when you know what your state laws are, then you can use your influence in ways that will be very helpful to the community and still won't get you in any trouble with IRS. We don't want you to give up on politics because you say that, oh, I may violate, my 501c3. If your state laws don't allow you to do voter registration in the church, do it in the restaurant down the street. Do it in, there are a lot of different places you can do it, but what you have is your congregation. Yes, do some of what everybody talk about in terms of reminding people of how far we have come, the sacrifices that were made, the Voting Rights Act, all of that, but also mobilize. Mobilize to use your absentee ballot laws, to make sure that people have the absentee ballot forms and they can gather like they gather at prayer meetings in people's homes or other places and help people with those absentee ballots. Then the other thing that some of you do already, we can do better, is to get people to the polls on election day by picking them up, but organize it and get a lot of those young people in the church to do this work. So we have to do that for the immediate. But as we plan, get with the Black Caucus and the elected officials as we plan for the future to talk about how the people in our communities know the difference between what we say and what we do. That's extremely important. So I still believe, and I'll just wrap this up, that the church has power. I think, again, as I said when I first started talking, unutilized power. And so what you find in our communities now, whether it's in our schools or in our businesses, we're losing power. We're losing power and influence because nobody is taking the leadership. And so the ministers and elected officials working together can have some sessions where we absolutely plan what we're going to do. If we're going to deal with the banks and the lending institutions in our community, the elected officials got to get with you, and we've got to call in the local branch managers. We got to review their CRA plans. What are you investing in the community? And not simply in phony mortgages, but in our businesses. Our businesses are almost non-existent in many of our places. But anyhow, we can do this work for the future. Let's do what we can for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mason.
Someone asked a question, how do you hold the Democratic Party accountable? The answer is simple. Form and support your own institutions. Again, form and support your own institutions. When there was no one speaking to the issue for black and brown voters and voter ID laws, we formed Protecting Our Vote Super PAC. Form and support your own institutions. We have a history of doing this. Black churches formed HBCUs. Out of HBCUs, and I'm an Omega man, and I see purple and gold sitting out on the table. I'm standing next to my Delta sister, but you must be an Alpha. But we have a history of doing this. This is not new to us, but somehow we've forgotten. We've forgotten how to take our political power and turn it into economic power, that turns it into more political power, that turns it into more economic power. We forgot how to support our institutions. But you know who hasn't? You know who we haven't learned from? And they do this all the time, the pro-Israel community. They are much smaller than us, but they have a much greater footprint. Form and support your institutions. That's how you hold people accountable. Power concedes nothing without demand. We demand nothing, we get nothing.
Thank you, Darryl. Ms. Ansah.
We cannot control the conversation unless we understand the issues. We cannot become politically sophisticated unless we know and understand the issues. We cannot set an agenda, and we cannot leverage our power unless we know and understand the issues. Education is the most important piece in all of this. We have to be educated on the issues in order to be active. FaithLink has come up with 6, and they're very short, 6 action items that you can take home and start to do with your congregations around the voter education issue and around other policy issues. They all fall within the CBC's 3-step action plan. The first one is to set up a voting task force. When Congresswoman Waters talks about utilizing the power that you have in your congregations, the different skill sets that the members hold, this is something that you can do. It's very real, it's practical, and you can empower your congregations in doing it. The second is providing voter education information and training materials to your membership. You can put a leaflet in your bulletin. You can make announcements. You can do very simple things to make sure that your congregation has the information that they need. The third is sponsor and organize a voter registration event. The fourth, host a public policies issue forum. The fifth is coordinate an early voting program. And the last is coordinate an election day program. Those are 6 simple things that you can do. These are real things that you can take back with you. Organizations like FaithLink that are not 501c3s that have more flexibility to be able to help you can assist you in doing that.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Reverend Tony.
But the thing I would say is you need to take the excuses off the table. This is not the hardest times the black church has ever seen. The black church has strategized, organized, and mobilized in the midst of slavery, in the midst of segregation, in the midst of Jim Crow. In the midst of Reagan and the Bushes. So this is not the hardest time the black church has ever seen to be able to mobilize our community. We cannot get to a place in which we got a black man, a black woman, a black grandmama, 2 black children, and a black dog in the White House, and now act like we've lost our mojo. Amen, somebody. But you've got to remember who you are and whose you are. And when you remember, you got to get your swagger back. Amen. You used to be beautiful. You used to be beautiful. I mean, really. I mean, it's time time to reclaim who you are and what you do and say, no, we know how to do this. We've done it before. We've done it in worse times than this, and we can do it again with God on our side. But you've got to get the excuses off the table and remember who you are and whose you are.
Thank you. Let's give all of our panelists a big round of applause. I just want to close this session by saying this one thing. In our community, in the Black community, we have always elevated our pastors. Always. From the beginning of time. We have elevated you here today. But remember that you still have a charge to keep. Remember that you are here to serve this present age. And who knows that you may be in this place today just for such a time as this. God bless you.
We want to thank, someone mentioned today Bishop Brookins' funeral will be Friday in Los Angeles.
Yeah, okay.
We want to thank Congresswoman Marcia Fudge for emceeing this session. And to remind you that the buses will depart for the National Ecumenical Service at 6:30, and it will be at the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church. The service will begin at 7:30. The preaching will come from Bishop Thomas L. Brown Sr. And the Congressional Black Caucus would like to express appreciation to the CNBC, whose chair is Dr. C.F. Franklin Richardson, and the President Jackie Burton. We appreciate the partnership that we've had. And it is important for me to say that the idea and the push to get this partnership developed and to have members of the clergy to come to Washington so that we can present them with information came from Congressman Charles Rangel. And for a period, I did even hide from him on the floor because he was going to say, Rev, how are we coming with the conference? Is everything on target? And we and the Congressional Black Caucus believe that Charles B. Rangel is the epitome. He is the consummate congressman. And we are all pleased and fortunate to just have the opportunity to sit at his feet and to learn from him. Almost 41 years ago, 13 members of Congress who were African American came together and formed the Congressional Black Caucus. And among those 13 was the gentleman to my left, Charles Rangel. And for over 40 years now, Charlie Rangel has been one of the leading voices of reason and one of the leading voices for justice and peace in the House of Representatives. And, you know, I think that he is a historical figure that we all need to talk about. You know, Yahushua is the Hebrew pronunciation for the word Joshua. And he made sure that he told all of the priests to be able to define what some stones meant that he placed in a roadway called Ebenezer. And we all need to be able to tell people what the stones of development meant to us. I mean, there's a stone called Martin, and there's a stone called Frederick Douglass, and there's a stone called Sojourner Truth. There's a stone called Martin Luther King and Abernathy, and there's a stone called Charlie Rangel. And I want to say to you today that I intend to, every chance I get, to tell people what this stone has meant. This stone has meant that we had somebody who had the cerebral power, the intellect, and the political know-how to get things done that 30 or 40 years ago nobody even dreamt of. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased and proud to present the man who we all believe to be one of the greatest members of the House of Representatives to ever walk the halls, Congressman Charles B. Rangel from New York.
Well, I guess there won't be anything left for the funeral. I think you said it all. But I cannot tell you how good, how very, very good I feel today. Just as we waited to get a president of color, we needed a minister, a legislator, a leader like Eldridge Cleaver to help us without being critical of us to find a pathway that provides lights for those that follow us. Bringing this together with the energy of staff and having all of the members get excited about this. I'm telling you that it's a moving thing for us. Someone said that this is the beginning of a partnership. No, we can't afford to have this as the beginning of anything. This is it. This is the big one. This is the time. And we have to pledge to each other. I'll let you in on a couple of secrets. And we're going to leave here as one. First of all, I got a lot of medals in Korea. Some of the people that survived with me call them track medals, but what the hell? I'm here. But when I thought that these tens of thousands of Chinese just about had done everything to my colleagues, we had 90% casualties, I took a shot in the dark and said, Jesus, I know it's all over. I was 20 years old. I mean, there was no way with the moaning and the groaning and the crying and the bugles and the gunshot and to see people being captured. I knew it was a nightmare. But I just said that if you could see it clear, just see it clear, somehow to spare me, I promise you never, never in life will you have a problem with Charlie Rangel. And I wrote a book. And the whole book is that since that day, I haven't had a bad day since. Not a bad day since. And I am convinced if we look over our past, that we have gone through rough days and never realized how rough they were. And so what I have done was to profile and courage. If what we are facing today is the destruction of human rights as we know it, women's rights, decency, fairness, if that is being destroyed, somebody's got to ask, and what were you doing? You know, when I marched the 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery, I had bad feet, and I wasn't thinking about marching in those southern roads that I didn't know much about. But when they told me Dr. King was going to take some pictures with us, I got dressed up and I went down there. And I had a round-trip ticket to get back to LaGuardia. It started raining, and instead of going back into the churches, people started putting on plastic around their worn-out shoes. Well, I had Florsheim shoes on, a cashmere coat, and it didn't appear to me that this was my setting. I came down for pictures, and I thought this would be the appropriate time for me to get a cab and to see the paper and see how the pictures turned out. But as they started moving, I don't know how many of you knew Selma 60 years ago, but as they started moving, I found myself without any sidewalk. I was actually in woods with a bunch of mean National Guards people spitting tobacco protecting me as we marched singing "We Shall Overcome" into the woods with hostility all around me, no cabs, no photographers, no way to get back. For 54 miles, my bad feet and I said, what the heck are we doing in these woods marching like this? I had no clue that history was being made. I thought it was just another bad day for me. I did not know it meant the Voting Rights Act. I did not know it meant the Civil Rights Act. I did not know how many people had marched and marched and marched, like John Lewis and Andy Young, who understood each and every risk they were taking and took it. And even though the story is told in a very different way to my grandkids today, I wondered how many times you and I and others have realized that as we meet today, as we adjourn today, as we've been able to bring together the black churches, not just the history, but the symbol, just people all over the world knowing that you met. Even Maxine doesn't know. When I was chairman of the caucus, the best thing going for us was Nixon rejection of us. And we used to meet and have no agenda, and the press would be outside, and we wouldn't tell them what we were meeting about. But damn, every day that Nixon wouldn't meet with us, we had a meeting. And they said, here we were, ready to blow up the world. But the fact is, if they think we're together, if we act like we're together, if we leave here together, if we have no bad word for each other, I mean publicly. We do what we have to do privately, but if we find out that the solidarity that we have, someone mentioned my Jewish friends. I sat next to a guy in law school. He felt so proud that he wasn't Jewish in terms of religion with his ham sandwiches and all the laws he'd broken. But when Israel got attacked, he grew 10 feet tall with solidarity. Because he had something left in him that he believed in. And God knows it's not just Martin Luther King. There's a little bit of Martin Luther King, a little bit in all of us. And if we can take the things we have done, Franklin, Richardson, the willingness of people to come together, the fact that the church is the only thing some people have. They can never aspire to get money and wealth or any of those things, but they believe in you. We're asking you as a Congressional Black Caucus to believe that we're all you got. We're in your hip pocket. We want to be with you. We hope at the end of this meeting that you think about adopting a half a dozen of us. If we live in your district, that's a contract. If you live in a district like Franklin Richardson, you probably get 30 or 40 members adopted. But pick who you want. And I tell you, we'll make you feel like we don't move without you. Because one day we'll be coming back and ask, please act like we were right. We got a vote on the floor. We'll be asking you to call every member. Tell them who you are, how many congregates that you got, how important this is to you. And I assure you that the church's symbol will be bigger, and God knows, only God knows, how much stronger your Congressional Black Caucus can be. We started with 13 members, then 26, then 32, then 42. There's no limit with the way the color is coming into our country, how far we can go. And if they think we're as serious and as powerful as we know we can be, if you're a part of that wind under our wings, today will be a day you will never want to forget. So I know you got to take your buses, but just look at the members, see which ones you want, which ones you live with. I am as serious as I can be. And we will write you back and tell you the issues that we are dealing with. Can you imagine what would happen if our chairman gave you a list of issues, asked all of you to take a look at which one you think is the best for your church and the best for the community in our country, and then one Sunday we all over this country pick something that everyone, white, black, Jew, or Gentile, would say, we never thought about that. Because I take my seat saying, I never gave Chairman Cleaver a hard time. What I told the chairman was that I didn't know much about the Bible. All I knew is that I was an altar boy. They were talking Latin. They were throwing incense in my face. And I was listening to the same thing every Sunday. But there was one thing that came out of it, and that is there were some rich people, and they wanted to get into heaven, as I remember it. And they were waiting for Jesus to explain why he was blocking the way for their admission into heaven. And he explained to them that he was naked, and he had no clothes, that he was sick, they didn't come to visit him, that he was in jail, and they ignored he was hungry, he was thirsty, that basically he was in bad shape. And he went to them, and they just turned him down. And as I remember the story, they looked at each other and said, no, you got the wrong people. You never came to any of us. And he said something like, if you don't understand how you should be treating people who are not me, but the lesser of people like me, then you should go straight to hell. That's all I remembered. And so I keep bringing it back and forth and saying, that's our mission. We saw on television what they think about us as a people. The Republicans have named us, and thank God you're our partners, and I feel so proud as I walk out here. I like to say that in 3 months, this is the first day I tried to do it without a cane. Thank you.
We certainly want to thank the congressman. Come on. As you remain standing, let me say that I want to thank all of you for sharing. We have another full day tomorrow. Tomorrow night is our awards dinner. We want to ask you, please, we're honoring James Clyburn tomorrow night. It's one of the honorees tomorrow. And we are asking you to please make sure you get your ticket for tomorrow's dinner. The bus is leaving from Ecumenical Service, as Chairman says, 6:30. Board members depart at 6:15 on K Street, board members of K Street. I want to close out by saying how grateful I am. K Street, board members, at the front door. I want to say how grateful we are to our congressmen. They have honored us today. And the truth of the matter is that for most of us, this national display of unity between the caucus and the Conference of National Black Churches is not a pretense, because we live it out every day in the districts of this nation. Most of us, our churches, have had partnerships with our congressmen, and they've been faithful to us, especially the members of the caucus. We want them to know we're proud of you. We found great joy in the service you've made. You've made us proud. And we've never once rejected the idea that we invested in you, and you have always delivered on our part. This is my congressman. I live in Westchester, but this is my congressman. He's in Harlem, and he's been such a great. But I want you, Mr. Chairman, to know, on behalf, and let me tell you, this was not just a ceremonial partnership. Mostly all of the caucus has been through here today. From early this morning, you saw nothing but congressmen. You almost thought this was where the legislation was being passed here today, because the caucus was here. So on behalf of all of the pastors of our 9 denominations, AMEs, CMEs, AME Zions, Church of God in Christ, 4 Baptist denominations, all 9 of us, and independent churches, because we have also opened up the caucuses within mainline denominations. And we are building a movement. We're not gathered for religious or theological purposes, even though our thinking flows out of our theology. Right. We are gathered around education, health, social justice, and economic empowerment. Right. And when the church comes together around those issues and puts aside the denominational badges that separate us from the service of our people, there is no telling the impact that we can have in this country. And this election season is an important test of whether or not we're serious. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership.
Yeah, thank you. Let me thank you too, Mr. Chairman, and our staff and all the work that they put into it, as well as the staff of the CNBC. And now let us prepare to leave from this place. And now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy, to the God our Savior, who alone is wise, be glory and majesty, dominion and power, both now and forevermore. And the people of God said, Amen. Amen.
Hey, sugar. I can't tell you the whole story. No, don't tell us. Don't
While the Senate's in recess this week, we're showing you Book TV in prime time here on C-SPAN 2, starting at